Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and thank you, Philip, for that nice introduction. We're excited to be here to talk with you today a little bit about the social science side of this project that we've been working on that Philip just described. But before we do that, I'd just like to, give a shout out. Happy Valentine's Day to all of you. Really appreciate you taking time out of your day today to be with us. So I'm not going to spend much time here on this slide because Philip already gave you an overview of this grant. And if you're here on our webinar and have been on any of our other webinars associated with this series, then you have a pretty good idea of what this project is about. But essentially, we're trying to help the nursery and greenhouse industry conserve irrigation water and manage water quality issues. Dr. Warner and I are on our webinar today because of our role in the project, which we are the social scientists. We're not bench scientists. We're not the ones creating new technologies for you all to integrate into your facilities. We're trying to understand why some nurseries adopt these practices and others don't. And we've taken several approaches to doing that, which we'd love to share the results of that work with you today. But as we know, people are really messy, and sometimes adopting new practices or changing our behavior is not always easy. So I love this slide just because it shows all the roadblocks in the way of what we ultimately all want to achieve, but there are many reasons that we don't get to that place. And so we'd like to discuss some of that with you today. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Warner.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Lamb. Good afternoon, everyone. So we are taking kind of a holistic perspective on the role of plants in society. And as everyone on this call today knows, there's just a plethora of benefits that we get from plants, from what they do for our environment to the social benefits we receive to the economic benefits that we receive. But production of those plants requires a lot of resources, and so we're looking for ways to find a balance there and minimize resources when possible. And through taking this perspective, we've identified a role for growers, extension professionals, and researchers, as well as consumers to play. So we're looking at ways to encourage the use of some of these water conservation and treatment technologies. And just a few, this isn't all of the ones we've been looking at, but some of the water conservation technologies include drip irrigation, soil moisture sensors, the practice of recycling and reusing water. And then for water treatment options, we've been discussing the use of chlorine, ozone, and ultraviolet radiation. So to start this project, what we did is qualitative interviews around the country, and we conducted 24 of these at the growers' operations. And we wanted to talk to the people who were the growers or were otherwise involved in making decisions about irrigation. When we had these conversations, we were really trying to get at what encourages the use of or prevents the adoption of some of these different conservation and treatment technologies. And we asked a lot of deep questions to try and get at the answer to our questions. And we analyzed the data, and what we looked at was attitude towards these technologies and practices, the perceived ability to adopt them, and also what type of support the growers and decision makers were receiving from their peers. And when these three things are high or positive, growers are more likely to adopt these technologies and practices. So as I mentioned, we conducted these interviews around the country. Most of the folks we spoke with were male. We did speak with 2 females, and we talked to people that represented very small family businesses, and we also talked to medium and large size commercial operations. So we wanted to get a really good mix that was representative of the range of growers across the country. And what we found is that the majority were actively engaged in recycling water, about 88%, but just over half had not implemented any of the water treatment technologies that we discussed. So I'll present some of these findings in the order that we analyzed them. And the first is attitude. So what we found was that attitudes towards these different technologies and practices was positive overall. So that tells us that attitude generally is supporting of their adoption. But we did find some negative associations, and those really came out when there were concerns with safety, such as with the use of chlorine for water treatment, and also when there were issues with different equipment when we were talking about some of the technologies. So when decision makers were concerned with one of these things, they were less likely to adopt or continue using a technology. But then within this category, we found that when a technology or practice solved problems within the operation, they were likely to have a more positive attitude. And we also found that some of these technologies and practices reduced plant infections. So healthier plants means more plant material to sell and a more positive attitude. And also, sometimes the technologies and practices reduced costs to the operations. So all three of these sub-themes led to more positive attitudes, which means higher rate of adoption. And so we have two quotes here that came out of the interviews. A very efficient way to get a lot of plants watered quickly, and Mike discussed properly treating the water to make sure plants are getting clean water, and ultimately that would lead to healthier plant material. So some recommendations related to attitudes. As growers or as researchers and extension professionals are developing and disseminating new treatments and technologies, need to be sure that they're solving problems and contributing positively to plant health, as well as reducing costs. And a lot of times they will do that, but we need to make sure that we're communicating to the end user that these are some of the benefits that they provide. And we need to study the long-term value compared to the upfront costs. In situations where something is very costly, we think it would be really beneficial to develop case studies to show over time how that cost could be recouped. And this is a role that growers can really come into play, and where we can work together to develop case studies to demonstrate the long-term value. And for those who are disseminating the different technologies and practices, it's important to communicate what the safety risks are for those technologies or practices that do have risks, and how to remediate them. So the second theme that we looked at is the perceived ability to adopt some of these treatments and technologies, and how easy or difficult really it is to adopt them. Something that makes it difficult to adopt some of the technologies is cost again. And we saw with representatives from both our small and large operations that sometimes cost is a big barrier, and that can prevent adoption. Perceived ability is also can also be reduced when there is inadequate technical training. And so if you're not sure how to incorporate something in your operation, you're going to be less likely to implement it. And another common comment that came up is a lack of infrastructure to integrate some of the newest technologies into an operation. And here's a quote from Henry, where he said we could be using more micro irrigation, but they had infrastructure in for overhead irrigation, so it's been extremely expensive for his operation to consider changing to micro irrigation. So we had some recommendations based on perceived ability, and again, cost-benefit analyses need to be provided. Another great opportunity for researchers, extension, and growers to work together to look at how that long-term value can be communicated. And we need to educate on the increased willingness of consumers to pay for sustainably grown products. So when consumers are more likely to pay for something that's been grown using less water or some of these water treatment technologies, that can increase the perceived ability and can increase the likelihood of adopting some of these practices. Another angle to take to increase perceived ability is to increase access to subsidies and other financial support, and that can help to bring down that prohibitive cost. And often it may be helpful to start with some of the less complex technologies or practices, and once something that's a little easier to get integrated into an operation is established, then possibly move to something that's more complex. And for those that are developing new technologies, it's important to ensure that the technologies can work with existing systems when that is a possibility. And a role for growers to play here is to communicate what the needs are and where infrastructure can potentially be incompatible, or where components are needed to increase that compatibility. And there is some more research that is needed here in the form of a needs assessment and continuing to develop technologies that fit what is already in place. Then our third major theme that came out of our interviews was perceptions of support from peers. And what we found is that growers really, really care about how they act as stewards of the land and of water resources. But in addition to that, they want others to know that they care, and it really kind of comes out as a culture of the industry. And we found that growers really want to do the right thing for society. They also want to be seen as environmentally friendly among other growers and also among their consumers. So you can see Alex pointed out as an industry that we really need to do the right thing. And Jacob really wanted his customers to know that they're doing their part to protect public or water resources. So some recommendations to build off of support from peers is that we've got this very strong industry culture that can be used to drive change to the adoption of more of these water treatments and technologies. And we can conduct demonstrations at growers' facilities, and many folks are already engaged in using some of these practices and technologies. So by conducting demonstrations to build on that social component within the industry can be very helpful in getting others to engage. And in addition to possibly getting engaged in demonstrations, current growers who are using some of these technologies and practices can advocate among their peers because we know that that social pressure is very influential. And for extension professionals and researchers, we know that there's this deep connection to the land and natural resources, and so we can build on that to develop communications and programs. And finally, because we know that it's so important for customers to understand how water resources are being protected by an operation, there's a big opportunity to develop campaigns that can help growers to market what they're doing to protect water resources and otherwise be good stewards of the environment. So this is some of the interview work we've done, and we built our survey on this, and I will turn it back over to Dr. Lamb to tell you about that part of the project.
Great. Thank you, Laura, for giving us an overview of those initial interviews we did. So we used the interview data and the results that she just shared with you to create a survey, because while yes, it's wonderful to talk with 24 growers about their perceptions, that doesn't really give us a view of growers nationwide. And of course, it's easier for us to talk with growers that are more involved in water conservation treatments and technologies, and maybe even serving as opinion leaders within that space and kind of leading the conversation around water conservation. So we wanted to use everything that we learned to create a survey that we could send out to growers nationwide, and that's what we did. We built a survey based on some of those findings. We had it reviewed by a panel of experts from our team, and we got a list of growers from a study done by Texas A&M a couple of years ago on the economics associated with the greenhouse industry, and we sent our survey out to I think about 2,500 growers. And as you can see at the bottom here, we obtained 146 responses. The growers here on our call, you all are not an easy group to get to respond to a survey, but it's still out in the field. But I wanted to share with you today some of our responses and give you a glimpse into where we're at with adoption of new treatments and technologies nationwide. So just a brief review, and these are, again, preliminary results. We're still collecting data, but the majority of our respondents are male. Like I said, we sent this as an email right now out to facilities and asked for the person who was in charge of managing water for the facility to respond. So that's kind of just our breakdown by gender. This is age. So you can see most of our respondents are between age 45 and 74. This is not necessarily surprising to us considering the aging workforce in agriculture broadly, but you can see here that the greenhouse industry is aging, and we had not very many young individuals respond to our survey. This is the size of the operation. We just asked for production size based on financial receipts, and so you can kind of see we have a variety of different growers, from your small, more local growers to large-scale growers that responded to the survey. Then we asked them what their level of education was. So you can see here that the majority of those that responded to the survey had either a four-year college degree or a graduate or professional degree. Okay, so we actually asked them a whole slew of questions. I'm only going to report a few of them here for you today, just to kind of start the conversation on what we're looking at. But we asked them what their water sources were, and you can see that the majority of greenhouses are using private supply off of their wells or else a municipal public supply. Very few are using rainfall capture on their roofs. This was a check all that apply, so if a grower did have multiple sources of water, they could mark multiple categories. But you can see that where the water is primarily coming from on the facilities. Next, we asked them about their use of treatments. How many of them use these different treatment technologies that we are focusing on in this project? And don't let this bar graph deceive you. If you look on the left-hand side, the tallest one is just under 30%. So this isn't on a 100% scale here. So the most we had adopting these treatments was 29.3% of our respondents. You can see, I want to draw your attention to the right-hand side. You can see there was not a single grower that reported using algal turf scrubbers for pathogen removal or carbon denitrification walls for nitrogen removal. So no one is using those treatments currently. The ones most commonly used are the vegetated buffer or riparian buffer for sediment and nutrient removal, and the vegetated channel for sediment and nutrient removal. Interestingly enough, we talked about this with our bench scientists on our team, and you know, as growers, we feel very comfortable with plant products, and so they believe that the reason why those are the most commonly used is because they coincide with what we do as an industry. We grow plants, and so using vegetated buffers, vegetated channels feels comfortable. And so as we think about these things, as we think about the amount of treatment technologies that are being used, and how do we increase the amount of treatments that are being used to help us clean and recycle water. So if you recall, Laura talked earlier about some of the safety concerns associated with some treatments, and interestingly enough, the chemical treatments here, let me get the little pointer right here. Ozone, chlorine, hydrogen peroxide for water pathogen removal were at about 16% are using this. And there were some concerns throughout our interviews on safety associated with chemical treatment. So I thought that was pretty interesting. We also asked about conservation use. You can see the spread here. Now, I do want to bring your attention to this graph has 70% as the top there. So on the last one, we were talking, the max was 30%. Here, drip irrigation is being utilized by 65%. So that has been adopted for the most part across the industry. We do see on the low end, irrigation audits have only been conducted by 6.1%. So familiarity, we also asked their level of knowledge associated with these different conservation and treatment technologies. And by and large, the growers that we surveyed that have responded so far are fairly unfamiliar with what an irrigation audit is, which probably tells us why they're not actually engaging in that practice. So you can see here we have about a quarter participating in micro irrigation, 33% in water reuse. Rainwater capture is over half, and drip irrigation is a large amount. See, so that's just some preliminary results we wanted to share with you today. Our next steps for this part of the project is to continue to collect data on these surveys. We have developed a hard copy survey that's now available that we're going to be administering at extension programs and trying to get more growers to respond. We've also translated our survey into Spanish in both our online and hard copy versions, so we're hoping to get some more response that way. And we've also been looking at some of these factors that Laura discussed with you earlier, that perceived ability, attitude. We also looking at the relative advantages of these new treatments and technologies over what we've used in the past, how compatible those are with what we use in the industry currently, if we can try things before we actually adopt them, would that help increase adoption? And also observing these things in action, so maybe providing some programming where we can show all of you the new treatments, new technologies, if that's going to help see how it could work within current operations. We are part of the team that's going to be assisting in developing extension programs and communication materials that are driven by these results. So we are just in the middle of a 5-year project. So that's kind of the next things to come, and we're kind of excited about that. I do see there's a few questions in the chat box. Let me see if I can answer these. Are these technologies used for both greenhouse and open nursery production sites? I believe so. I believe the survey went out to growers in both greenhouse and open nursery production sites. Of course, some of the technologies and treatments are going to be more efficient or more effective within a greenhouse environment, and some in an open nursery production site. We did ask in this survey what type of facility they have, so we can break out the results by group. So we haven't done those kinds of breakouts yet, but this is just kind of our overall preliminary results. Then the last question, do you have a percentage of companies who use more than one of the treatment programs? That's a great question, Brenda. Again, they could check all that apply. We have not looked to see if how much overlap there is. I'm guessing that there is quite a bit of overlap, and we'll be able to reveal some of that data as we dive further into it. We just wanted to run some of these numbers for you to give you some idea of what's going on in the out in the industry right now.